Hi, I'm James Zogby, and welcome to Viewpoint. On tonight's program, we're going to discuss a portion of the Constitution known as the Bill of Rights, its history and significance, and more importantly, the rights it conveys, and how they may be being eroded today as a result of some political and national security concerns. I want to hear from you on the topic. We'll get into that later in the show. I want you to give us a call with comments and questions. The numbers will be listed on the screen. Joining me to discuss this issue is constitutional law expert David Cole. He's a professor at Georgetown University's Law Center and legal affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine. He litigated a number of major First Amendment cases for the Center of Constitutional Rights and is author of a number of books, including his latest, The Torture Memos, Rationalizing the Unthinkable. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
This is something I've told you I've wanted to do for a long time, a tutorial on the Bill of Rights. I think it'll be important for our viewers and important for the country, actually, that we understand the Bill of Rights. It's most often simply just not understood. Most Americans don't know what they are. But before we get to the topic, I want to talk about a couple of issues that are current and some that involve you directly. First, you argued before the Supreme Court this week the material support provision, a case involving support for the Tamil Tigers. Talk about that a little bit and the material support provision itself and why you find it unconstitutional.
Right. Well, this is actually a case which raises the first of the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment. We represent a group of Tamils in the United States and also the Humanitarian Law Project, which is a human rights group that goes back a couple of decades in Los Angeles. And they had been working with the Tamils in Sri Lanka and the Kurds in Turkey and doing things like working with them and encouraging them to pursue peace, training them in how to bring human rights complaints before the UN, advocating on their behalf before Congress, writing and distributing their literature. Until Congress made it a crime to provide material support to any group that has been designated a terrorist group, and then defined material support to include not just money and weapons and tangible things, but actually expert advice, personnel, training, and service, all of which the government contends includes pure speech. And so my clients came to me and said, wait a minute, we think we have the right to do this under the First Amendment. We think we have the right to talk to Congress, to teach human rights, but the government is saying that if we do it, we will be treated as terrorists and could spend 15 years in jail. And so about 11 years ago, we filed this lawsuit to get a ruling from the court that this is within their constitutional protection, and we're in the Supreme Court this week.
Predates the terrorist.
Predates 9/11. It postdates the Oklahoma. It was part of the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, and as you know, it goes even back before that to the LA 8 actually, and the material support used against immigrants.
It was, if I'm not mistaken, it was the executive order by the Clinton administration.
Well, but even before the executive order, yes, the executive order that it focused on the rejectionist groups in the West Bank, etc. That was an iteration of this. But even before that, in 1990, Congress made it a deportable offense to provide material support to a quote-unquote terrorist group, and that was the charge against the Palestinian LA 8 in Los Angeles.
If you look at the groups and the activities they carry out as deplorable, whether suicide bombing in one place or acts of terrorism against civilian in other cases, suicide bombing being a Tamil Tiger activity, and some of the Kurdish groups have engaged in some pretty horrific behavior in Turkey. Their cause may be just a denial of rights, but their behavior has been deplorable. What would be a legitimate standard to apply here of what would become punishable support for these groups?
Yeah. Well, in the case in the Supreme Court, we are not challenging the prohibitions on giving money. We're not challenging the prohibitions on giving weapons. We're not challenging any kind of prohibition on giving speech that advocates or aids illegal conduct. But what we're saying is that in the United States, if the First Amendment means anything, it means that you can't make it a crime to engage in lawful, peaceable advocacy, that is seeking to encourage the moderate wings of these organizations to pursue their grievances through lawful, peaceful means. I mean, that's the kind of work, as a political matter, that we should be supporting, not criminalizing. But secondly, people have a right to do that. I mean, this is, and as I said to the Supreme Court on Tuesday, that this is exactly the kind of move and the kind of argument that was made with respect to the Communist Party in the 50s and 60s, that they're an international conspiracy. They use deplorable means. They use terrorism. They're seeking to overthrow the United States by force and violence. They're run by the Soviet Union. And therefore, we have to cut off all support to the group, because any support could ultimately further the illegal ends of the group. And the Supreme Court said no. Under the First Amendment, you have a right of association. And if you're associating with a group to further its lawful ends, the government can't prosecute you. If you're furthering their illegal ends, if you're giving support to the bad stuff, absolutely they can prosecute you.
A victory in this case, should you win this case, what ramifications would it have broader than just the particular case that you're engaged in?
Well, that depends on how the Supreme Court writes the decision, of course. But I think it's the first case that pits First Amendment freedoms against national security post 9/11. So it'll be a good sort of harbinger of that. And I think it's also the first case that has brought part of the Patriot Act to the Supreme Court. Because one aspect of this, and in fact probably the most clearly unconstitutional aspect of this, a prohibition on advising these groups, even if the advice is totally lawful otherwise, was added in the Patriot Act.